Just a year ago, the US government was cracking down on Bitcoin and the entire crypto industry. Fast forward to today, US has announced a strategic Bitcoin reserve, passed landmark stablecoin legislation, and is openly positioning itself
that we will make America the undisputed Bitcoin superpower and the crypto capital of the world
as the global Bitcoin superpower. What changed? Why is the US suddenly so pro-Bitcoin? And what's the hidden plan connecting stablecoins and America's long-term global dominance? If you stick around till the end of this video, you'll see why these moves are not just random, but part of a bold, calculated strategy to reset the global monetary order with Bitcoin at the center. My name is Shaleen Chauhan and welcome back to my channel where we talk all things Bitcoin. Now without wasting any more time, let's dive right in. It was early 2023. Crypto in the US was under attack. Operation Choke Point 2.0 pressured banks to cut off crypto firms. The SEC was in full-blown crackdown mode. Then in July 2024, at the Bitcoin conference in Nashville, three presidential candidates, including the sitting president Donald Trump, stood in front of a sea of Bitcoiners. At first, it looked like the usual campaign pandering, but just 12 months later, here's what has happened. US has a Bitcoin strategic reserve and a publicly stated policy to acquire as much Bitcoin as possible. Here's White House spokesperson saying it himself.
I've heard a lot of different senators and other folks on the Hill talk about specific numbers, but I'd like it to be infinite. I want as much as we can possibly accumulate. And the reality is, I've told many people this, and especially journalists, is they say, well, is there an exact number? Well, no, not really, because that's like saying how much gold do you want as a country? Anything else with intrinsic stored value, you want as much as you can possibly accumulate, and that's no different with Bitcoin.
US has passed the Genius Act that allows US financial institutions to issue dollar-backed stablecoins backed by US treasuries, which might be the modern equivalent of the new Petrodollar system. And leading this charge, President Donald Trump himself, who's not only stacking the government with pro-Bitcoin allies, but pushing through moves like allowing Bitcoin as collateral for home mortgages or enabling Bitcoin investments in the $43 trillion retirement accounts market. These aren't just random acts of crypto kindness. They are coordinated moves, and they rhyme with a historic US playbook that's been used before to maintain global dominance. What am I talking about? And what does it all mean? To understand these changes, let's look at history. After the devastating World War II, the US was the industrial powerhouse with more than 50% of world's GDP. Under the Bretton Woods Agreement, the dollar became the world's reserve currency pegged to gold. But in 1971, President Nixon cut gold convertibility, risking the dollar's dominance. The solution? The Petrodollar system, which basically priced oil exclusively in dollars in collaboration with OPEC nations like Saudi Arabia, forcing global demand for USD. OPEC nations then recycled those dollars into the US treasuries, funding US spending. Genius, right? Well, it's definitely interesting. Let's keep going and drill a bit further. With the petrodollar arrangement, US could basically print dollars and export them to the world to finance itself. Sounds amazing, right? Almost too good to be true. But we know there's never a free lunch. So what's the real cost that the US is paying? Well, you see, oil being traded in US dollars made the dollars artificially strong. And a stronger dollar made the US manufacturing less competitive. Over decades, this led to hollowing out of the US manufacturing industrial base that resulted in phenomena of Rust Belt in the late 20th century. Alright, so what, US isn't a manufacturing powerhouse now? What's the problem? You may ask. If you don't see it yet, it's right there. See, the very thing that made the US dominant at the end of World War II, that is the US being the dominant industrial base that allowed US dollars to become the world reserve currency, that same reserve currency status resulted in hollowing out of the US industrial base. This paradox is what is called Triffin's dilemma. The burden of reserve asset is so great that no country's currency can lift the weight over long time. And the only way to handle this is to move to a neutral reserve asset. Historically, this role has been performed by gold. Now, what is the connection between US becoming pro-Bitcoin versus solving the Triffin's dilemma? That's the $1 million Bitcoin question, my friends. You see, Bitcoin is digital gold. Instead of going back to the gold standard, US may have decided to go directly to the digital gold standard instead, aka the Bitcoin standard. Why does it make sense for US to go to the Bitcoin standard? You may ask. Well, probably because US has a strategic advantage when it comes to Bitcoin against its adversaries, as it has the highest share in global Bitcoin mining, and the US companies and citizens hold the most amount of Bitcoin in the world. Let's not forget, Bitcoin is better version of gold than gold itself. Now you may say, sure, Bitcoin may be the new global neutral reserve asset. What's that got to do with stablecoins? Here's where it gets interesting. Like oil in the 70s backed the dollar, stablecoins could now play the same role but in the crypto economy. The Genius Act forces the stablecoin issuers to hold US treasuries, which pumps demand for them. Stablecoins market cap is projected to increase 15 times to $3.7 trillion by the end of this decade. And as stablecoin market grows, Bitcoin price will also rise in parallel due to a strong correlation between Bitcoin and stablecoins market cap. That's how you scale Bitcoin market big enough so that it can eventually serve as a neutral reserve asset. It's basically a 2-in-1 strategy that generates demand for US treasuries, which helps the US government to manage its debt on the one hand, while also inflating Bitcoin to gold levels for future reserve use. I believe that's why President Trump signed an executive order to allow crypto exposure even in people's 401ks, that is the retirement account. Now to wrap this all up, here's the main takeaways. The US needs to move to a neutral reserve asset, or it will lose the military and economic superiority because of Triffin's dilemma. Because you cannot be a superpower if you are dependent on other countries for manufacturing of your critical supply. The only viable options are gold and Bitcoin. The world is already moving towards more digitization, not less. That's where US has been dominant with its big tech companies. So it all makes sense for US to choose digital capital as the next world reserve asset for the digital world. And that's why US may have decided to pivot to become pro-Bitcoin. If you found this breakdown valuable, hit the like button and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss my next deep dive. Thanks everyone for listening, and I'll see you all next time.